Good evening, everyone. I believe we should be streaming. We should be live right now. Please drop the typical one in the chat so that I know that the audio is coming through. And today, of course, we have a very, very special guest. Uh, well, everyone says Lloyd's channel is great, except for him. And it's only good when the Thunderous One is on. And we have that man with us today. Hello, Thunderous One.
Hi, Lloyd. Hi, everybody. And those are really kind words. I'm not so sure I deserve them, but I'll take them nonetheless because it appeals to my vanity.
Yep. Okay, I just checked the audio is coming through great. You do, yeah. So, good evening, everybody. We've got Horse, of course. We've got Azul. We've got Dr. Jonathan Gemmell. Great to see you. Lilo Main can't make it. She was here earlier, but she has an appointment. And Dragon, thank you very much for being here, as always. And I've got Sergeant Grinch, Sandro Correa, Ernesto, and yeah, Just Janice. Welcome all. And guys, pinned in the top of the chat is a link. I've also dropped the link in the chat earlier in the beginning. It's the for those who yeah, it's free for everyone. The first 14 slides of a presentation I'm busy working on about Gnosticism and early Christianity. It's going to be an in-depth discussion on the early Christian church and Gnosticism and how the two were clashing, how Gnostics twisted the scriptures, and of course we will be discussing once again Dan Brown or Dumb Brown and the Da Vinci Clown, his book. Sorry, the Da Vinci Code. I keep getting that wrong. So we'll be discussing the utter falsehoods that scholars and authors and others actually tell about the Bible, going through the original history, the verifiable sources. We will discuss Nag Hammadi. We will discuss the Dead Sea Scrolls at Qumran. So this is going to be, I thought it would be 200 slides. I think it's actually going to be about 300. So I've made the first 14 available for the audience. And for those who are members, I've made the first 30 slides available to you, or the first 31. Please check the subscription, please check the membership tab. I've left a post there, and I've made several presentations available to you as members. So thank you all for your support. And yeah, one more thing. Let me show you something. So let's see. Thunderous is here. Let's see. Any comments? Oh, by the way, I want to show you guys something. This was from St. Constantine. I hope he doesn't mind me using his name, but I want to show you this. He says, "Hey, Lloyd, I just want to say I really appreciate all the information you've given out. I've learned a ton, and I've been spreading the information I've learned to people who want to listen. I actually got a co-worker to go from being an atheist to accepting Jesus Christ, which is amazing. I'm very humbled when this happens, and I've had so many people write to me, and that my work does this for them, and I didn't set out perhaps with that intention, or maybe I did. Maybe I think that the only way to deal with the craziness and the nastiness in the world today is to turn towards Christ, turn towards Christianity, turn towards the church. Your thoughts before I go on, Thunderous?
No thoughts at the moment. I was just busy looking in the chat, looking at some of the people are commenting, and there's one guy there, Akra, who's an ex-Muslim too, and I was just putting in a comment that I hope I say things that would resonate with him as well. But also I'd just like to say, if because I'll be speaking, hopefully Lloyd and myself are going to be doing a 3-part series. The first part is going to be predominantly my experience of being raised Muslim and with the Muslim community in the United Kingdom. The second part will hopefully be with reference to my sort of period with atheism, and in particular Darwinian evolution. And then the third part would be the why I accept the biblical narrative as reality. So if anybody's got any questions they'd like to ask, hopefully I'll pick them up in time. And yeah, thank you, Lloyd, for giving me this opportunity.
Yeah, let me share my screen with you for the few minutes, Thunderous, just so you can see what I'm showing at the moment. Okay, so that's done. So yeah, he says I got a co-worker to go from being an atheist to accepting Jesus Christ. And so, yeah, it's always very humbling for me to hear that. But I'm really so grateful to receive this message that he sent me. And he says, I'm sure you don't remember. Sorry, Thunderous?
No, I was just saying that it goes to show the little things, there's nothing bigger. So, you know, the fact that you've contributed to much of people's understanding of how the world works since the 1st century with atheism and Islam, that if that's somebody who's made a comment about the experience that they've had with your information, Lloyd, and I wonder if everybody wrote something, how much the influence has been in total. This has been somebody who's written their one account. It'd be nice if other people have had experiences too to put their comments in there, because I'm sure you've had a great influence on a great deal of many people for the number of years that you've been doing this.
Yeah, no, I get emails sometimes. There were times I would get like several of them in a row, and yeah, it's been really humbling. He says, "I'm sure you don't remember, but we interacted on YouTube when I commented Matthew 6:6 a long time ago. I don't remember what Matthew 6:6 is. I admitted to myself afterwards, maybe I'm wrong, and that perhaps I don't know as much as I thought at the time, being a Protestant Baptist, and I learned the history of the church, the fathers, the councils, and how we got the Bible. I began attending RCIA last year, and I will be confirmed in the Catholic Church, Easter 2024. Thank you, brother, and God bless." And I said, "I'm really happy to learn this. That is a profound turnaround. Thank you for sharing this news with me. Must have taken a lot of courage to take this step." And he says, "It's all been a different change of life and pace, but worth it tenfold." So just a news update for everyone. And then also, guys, I've released the first 50 slides of my Pius X series. It's on Coffee, right? So what I'll do is I'll just copy the link. I'll drop the link in the chat. This is Pius X versus modernism, so Pius X and modernism. I will drop this in the chat. That's in the coffee shop. And so I've added a couple more slides. So for those who want to get hold of that, I'm offering it for $5 at the moment. And again, please check the attached, the pinned link, the pinned comment in the chat. That's a free 14 slides of my new presentation on Gnosticism and the early church. Oh, and by the way, guys, I was in the UK. Let me just stop sharing because I don't have to share to Thunderous right now. So yeah, I was in the UK briefly, and I got to meet the Thunderous One. I also got to meet Century Since. It was quite an experience. So that was, and they both drove like an hour and a half to meet me. I was in the middle of nowhere. They both drove out. So thanks, Thunderous, for coming out and meeting me, and us having a steak pie and fish and chips in the pub.
It was a wonderful experience. It was well worth the journey. And for those who are probably unaware, Lloyd and myself go back several years. In fact, we actually met on a different channel, spoke to each other on another channel, which was with reference to apologetics or polemics against Islam. We lost contact. Then we met again on Mr. T's channel. That's Reasoned Answers. And then finally, we got to meet each other on Monday night in a pub in Cambridge, and a very pleasant experience, and looking forward to when we can do that again. So thank you for the opportunity as well, Lloyd.
Yeah, definitely. My visa is limited, so I need to make a plan to do so, and I'll be in touch about that. I'll be in touch. And also, guys, I will be in Barcelona. So if there's anyone from Barcelona, check my community tab. I've made a comment there, and yeah, that might be interesting to be able to meet up with one or two of you who might be in Barcelona. I'll be there for an entire week. So obviously, I do want to practice caution. You know, I don't want someone to try one of those. You know, yeah, you just never know. But I don't want to meet any crazies. But do reach out, and we'll chat this week, and I'll share the details. And perhaps I can meet one or two of you who happen to be based in Barcelona. And also, I do expect to be traveling quite a bit this year, so hopefully I'll be able to meet in Switzerland or Germany or Italy or other places. So yeah. Okay, Thunderous, over to you. And thank you, Just Janice, and thank you, Cetos, for the purchase. And Just Janice, thank you. My gosh, thank you very much for the generosity from all of you. Much appreciated. So yeah, Thunderous, over to you.
Okay, then. So I haven't got a script that I'm working to, and I don't know if you've got any questions that you've perhaps prepped up, Lloyd, or hopefully, if you haven't.
I wanted you to start, maybe just your thoughts, and then I'll ask some questions. Yeah.
Sure. So, Thunderous One. Obviously, I'm not. I have to be discreet with what my real name is. But yeah, Thunderous One, born in 1968, in the United Kingdom. I am what at the time you would call during the 70s mixed race or half caste or in current political terms now I have to use the term dual heritage. So I'm part Asian and part English. But that doesn't mean to say that though I was born mixed race, that you're not raised as a full Muslim, as it were. If your father is a Muslim, then it goes by nature that you'll be raised up as a Muslim in the Pakistani community of the United Kingdom. So the reason why I mentioned why or what year I was born in '68 is because there is a kind of relevance that you're seeing the first generation of the immigrants that came over to the United Kingdom in the 50s and the early 60s, that first generation of those that came over. But also being 56 this year that I am, you're also seeing the first generation as well as of mixed race or dual heritage or half-caste children, not just with Asians, but with the black community as well. And I think it's at this point, it might be a good point as well of reference that to give an idea, a visual idea of what it's like to be brought up with, say, a Pakistani father and an English mother, I would highly recommend the movie East is East. I would say that much of what's in that movie, about a good 80% of that, is absolutely factual. That is a very, very good account as to what it's like to be raised up as a Muslim in the United Kingdom, particularly during that period of time. So yeah, raised Muslim in the community, but I don't, and I think I've said this before on Lloyd's show, I certainly said it on Naria's show, that though I was raised as a Muslim, my father in fact was actually a communist. He wasn't really a Muslim,
Wow.
not in any sense. I think what people have to understand is that when you're brought up as a Muslim in the Muslim community, much of what you do is done by rote or it's done by culture. It's a cultural expectation. So though I was raised as a Muslim, the Quran school wasn't something that I had to go because my father expected me to go there to learn Islam and to become a good Muslim. It was predicated on the expectations of the Muslim community of the country at the time. So that's just
Right.
what you do, as it were.
Oh.
And when you're in Quran school, what tends to happen is everything that you learn is in Arabic. It's a language, so you learn the alphabet, and then you learn how to join up the writing, and then from there it progresses to the memorization of the Quran. So it's not really, you're not taking in information in a manner that you actually understand and can digest. So the illustration I would use is it's very much like we speak English in this country, and we use the English alphabet symbols in order to form words that then construct sentences. Now, we can use those same symbols to, say, write something in French. In fact, the French language uses English symbols in its language. So an English person that can't speak French can, in effect, get a French newspaper and almost read what is in the newspaper, though not necessarily understanding it, of what he's actually reading. In the same way, in pretty much, I would say, around the world, when you are in Quran school and you're learning things in Arabic, you're learning it in an Arabic text, and you could possibly read it, but that does not mean that you actually understand what you're reading. So everything is sort of perfunctory and by rote. You're not really taking any
So you
information.
can read it, but you don't necessarily understand. You can read and pronounce the words, but you don't necessarily understand the meanings.
Exactly. And that's what East is East is very good at. It actually shows you, and it teaches with violence as well. So that when I say it teaches with violence, they teach you in a form of rhythmic patterns. Okay, so there's a lot of rocking forward, back and forth, and I think that's a methodology in order to memorize the words, because you're memorizing them to a rhythm, very much like the way that people would learn, upon repetition, how they would pick up the words to a song. But when you're asked to recite what you've learned and you make an error, you are inflicted with an injury, probably with a rod or a stick or some kind of implement. So it's a lesson not taught with love. It's a formula taught with violence. Okay, there is punishment at the end if you don't get anything right. And from my observation, because I lived in Pakistan for about 6 months, it happens over there as well. So that's how Islam is taught, until you get to a certain point where you start learning it for yourself in your own language, where you get hold of a copy of the Quran.
You're punished if you don't learn.
You're punished if you don't learn. You're punished if you don't learn correctly as well, depending on the type of imams and what influences that they have in that community as well. The higher up or more respected he is, the more that they can get away with.
Right. I have 10 questions that I on the screen. I'm sharing them with you now as well, and also to
Sure.
the audience. But we can use these, or we can also just, take audience questions if the audience have any questions, and then we can also, as we bounce off the conversation. But you mentioned your father was a communist, so you escaped that. How did you not become a communist yourself?
No, communism is predicated on atheism. So, as I said, part two, I might touch on that because atheism in itself is predicated on Darwinian evolution. So, I bypassed the whole
Well, communism
communism.
is also atheistic, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So, communism is basically atheism, but atheism in itself is predicated on Darwinian evolution. So, I have to study Darwinian evolution in order to make decisions as to how I view the world. Okay, so that would possibly be more suited to the part two when I talk about why I didn't accept atheism and Darwinian evolution.
Yeah.
So I'm just reading another question here. Can you share with us your journey from where were in specific events or experiences that led you to leave Islam and embrace Christianity? The embrace Christianity would probably be part three, why I accept the biblical narrative, as I call it. But as far as specific events or experiences, there are too numerous. I think one has to bear in mind that when I talk about Islam, I'm going to use the word Islam. But when I talk about brown-skinned people, I'm going to refer to the Sikhs and the Hindus as well. Because what people don't seem to understand is that the religions may be different, but the culture is pretty much exactly the same. So you can have a community with people, say Sikhs in there. Well, let's say Sikhs, Hindus, and Muslims as an example. They all wear the same clothes. They all speak the same language. They all speak the same, eat the same foods, and they pretty much speak the same language. Have cultural similarities. It's only the religions that divide. Yet there are many things that are in common between them, if that makes sense. So if you're brought up in the Muslim community, you will pretty much understand what Sikhs are. You'll pretty much understand what Hindus are as well. So that's pretty much when I refer to brown-skinned people, that's who I'm referring to. And there's a reason why I say this, because it's going to come out a little bit later on as to the worldview that these people have against non-brown-skinned people. So just going back to things that started to question why I left Islam, one has to bear in mind being brought up in the 70s in this country. For those who are of my generation will remember that when you went to school, you had things like assembly, and there were certain Christian lessons that you had at school. And I was always fascinated from a very young age about Jesus. I mean, that there was just something about this guy. We would have little ladybird books about Jesus, and you would learn about Jesus. But I can't remember anything in particular because of we're talking about nearly 50 years ago now. But Jesus kind of featured quite predominantly very much in school activity, as it were. But also in the 70s, growing up, there was a lot of gospel, if you like, programs on TV. There was a lot of Christian TV. There'd be programs about, say, for instance, the Turin Shroud, or there'd be worship programs on a Sunday. So Christianity in the UK at the time was pretty much still a show of force or a strength in the community. It held community cohesively together with its objective moral values. But so being raised as a Muslim, you had that influence as well. But being raised as a Muslim, though, you are pretty much told from the Quran school and the community, being in the Pakistani community, white people will never accept you. They hate you. You will not be accepted by them. So at a very young age, there's an inculcation process of that. The community and the country that you live in will never accept you because of what you are. You're brown-skinned and you're Muslim, and these people will hate you. So
It destroys any hope of integration or loyalty.
It starts from a very young age as well. This is why when you're looking at the communities around the country, predominantly with the Muslim community and with the Hindu community as well, they're very insular. They don't integrate. The Hindus are very much the same, but with the Hindu community, they're not belligerents. They're not antagonistic. They just keep themselves to themselves. They don't overtly behave in a manner that brings any kind of reproach on their community. If anything that you would say negative about the Hindu community is that their corner shops are too expensive. Other than that, you don't really hear anything in the media about the Hindu community, but the Hindu community is quite big in this country, and I dare say in other European countries as well. There's a big Hindu community, but you don't really hear anything from them. The Sikh community is very much like the same as the Hindu community. They don't behave in a manner that brings reproach on their community. You know, they're very sort of like act in a, I don't know if this is the right word to put it, in a very covert way. You just wouldn't see them around. They don't bring reproach in the way of criminal activity. The Hindus are very much the same. They don't bring reproach on the community, but by being deliberately embroiled in politics. They don't bring reproach on their communities by being deliberately antagonistic with local communities and such. So the Sikh and the Hindus behave in a very sort of like, they're insular, but they don't behave in a manner that brings reproach. Whereas the Islamic community, it's you're taught at a very young age hate and dislike. That's not what you're to do. That's what the English will do to you. So the natural, if you like, reaction to that is, well, if they're not going to like me, I'm not going to like them. I personally was a little bit different. I'm not suggesting I'm an exception. I was a little bit different to react in that kind of way. So that's pretty much how it is being brought up as a Muslim in this country. You really, it's a community within a community. It's a law within the law, and it's almost like a mini culture, a mini country in itself. The community, in the fact that there are cultural walls that don't allow other communities to penetrate.
They call them parallel communities.
Parallel communities, exactly that. Yeah.
And that's interesting. But they create, even if they aren't any, they create this artificial barrier to exclude native Brits from being friends with native Brits.
But then they have a crafty manner of saying, but it's their fault. The Muslims are the Muslim community, and I dare say by extension other communities, are very good, and we're seeing it in the media today. The Muslims are probably the first to do this. They're very good at creating a problem, then playing the victim. And that's how we pretty much see the Muslim community behaving.
But that's an old strategy. Look at every single war in the Middle East against Israel. Israel was attacked, and then they fight back. And then the Muslims turn around, and then cry, and then claim that they're the victims.
Yeah, exactly that. So the number 4 question asks, what aspects of Christianity resonated with you and drew you towards the faith? I think that's a very good question, because there's two scriptures that come to mind when answering that. Genesis 1:26, where God says, let's make man in our image. So when you're looking at Genesis 1:26 and it says, let's make man in our image, that's clearly kind of like, as human beings, we reflect godly qualities, love, peace, wisdom, righteousness, and such. You don't see any of those qualities in Islam. You can't avoid, as a human being, those qualities that you're imbued with. And the other one I would think is probably Romans 3 or Romans 5, where Paul talks about the flesh being weak and miserable man that I am. When I want to do good, what is bad is present with me. It's only when you start looking at scriptures in the Bible that you can actually see, like James, the book of James says, like the Bible is like a reflection, is like a mirror. You look at the mirror and you see yourself in it. So when can you just go back to that question?
Sorry, yeah, okay, we go here, yeah.
I forgot what the question was because I was just leading.
The questions. My bad. We were asking.
So what Christians resonated with you? So using the word resonate then. So I would say it's only when you look at the scriptures of the Bible that you can see that there are certain characteristics that resonate with you. So when you look at Genesis 1:26, another one would be Ecclesiastes, where it talks about, I think it's Ecclesiastes, where it talks about time indefinite is put in their heart that mankind might find out the works that the true God has made from the start to the finish. So there are certain things that you read in the Bible that you think that makes sense, that makes sense, that makes sense. But when you start reading the Quran, you start reading the Quran in English, in the language that you understand, there is nothing that resonates with you. There is nothing that resonates with a person. And I've often said, growing up as a Muslim, if you're a person that likes to hate, if you're a person full of anger, if you're a person that wants to inflict violence on people, but you need a justification in order to do that. Islam is the perfect religion for you. It is the religion of hate. It is the religion of violence. It is the religion of belligerence. So if that's the kind of person that you are, and you want a religion that resonates, go choose Islam.
Right.
But if you want,
I wanted to mention something. This is the new set of slides that I'm busy working on, which you can see, Thunderous. This is Gnosticism and Early Christianity from Da Vinci Code to Nag Hammadi, right? And I want to go down here. I'm busy. Let me see here. Okay, so wait, I need to go to this slide. Okay, here. Within the Gnostics, within the Gnostics claim, and we're going to see a parallel here. We're going to look at some of the old Jewish views as well as some of the Gnostics, but Christianity is the first religion to elevate the status of women. Women had a very low view in 2,000 years ago, right? Even in Roman culture, even in Jewish culture, there were certain issues, but with the Gnostics as well. But they've all turned around and tried to make the claim that Christianity is misogynistic, that Christianity denigrates women, right? But what is interesting is that Jesus had women as companions, as disciples. Women were in leadership positions within his ecclesiastical group. This was absolutely and totally unheard of 2,000 years ago. That just didn't happen, and Jesus becomes the same. I'll show you a couple of statements. For instance, this is from Philo. He's a Jew. Now, what in one statement they basically says, for instance, you'll see this is Josephus, right? He says that a woman, says the scripture, a woman is inferior to her husband in all things, right? Now he says the scripture, and in fact this is not in the scripture at all. This is in the Talmud, or within these secondary texts which are extra biblical. This is not something, but he actually calls for him at that time, within that context, this was the view that a woman is inferior to her husband in all things. Now this, when you read through the later Talmud, right? This is in the earlier Talmud, the Jerusalem Talmud. When you go to the Babylonian Talmud, much of this stuff is removed and the status of women changes. But when you look at the milieu that Jesus grew up in, women had a very low status. For instance, they say here, this is Philo, the woman has no part in the noose, and she is not fashioned in the image of God. Right? Woman has no part in the mind of God. Woman has no part in the mind or the intellect of God, and woman is not fashioned in the image of God. That's Philo on the creation, right? And so this is a completely different view. And then we continue to the next page. You'll see here, and this is very Islamic, right? Philo says, the woman says to the serpent, we may eat the fruit of the trees of the garden. And he says, but the woman was more accustomed to be deceived than the man. Through her softness, she easily yields and is easily caught by the persuasions of falsehood. Philo, Questions and Answers on Genesis, right? So he believes that women are passion-driven, men are rational, and men have to keep women's sexuality under control. And he says here, wives must be slaves to their husbands, a servitude not imposed by violent ill-treatment, but promoting obedience in all things. That's Philo in Hypothetica 7.3. But this is very Islamic. They've taken this idea and run with it. Here you've got this Jewish idea from the Jerusalem Talmud era, which then Muslims have clearly taken, and they've made it, shall we say, even more toxic. Your thoughts on that, Thunderous?
Yeah, I was going to go into one of the reasons why I had a hatred for Islam, as well as its treatment of women. But just going on what you just said there, that is almost like verbatim in the Quran, isn't it? With the exception that you can inflict violence. That's the only difference.
Yes. Yeah, remember, but even they tell us, no, it's not violence, it's hit her with a toothbrush. Right?
Yeah, according to Zakir Naik, or hit her with a handkerchief. It's symbolic. It's a symbolic beating.
Yeah, but it's not. We know that. So, yeah.
I was just going to say, which is actually quite damning, because I don't know what books these people are reading. It certainly isn't the Bible, because just going on with what you said about the women, Rahab is an example. If people turn around and say that the Bible is full of, say, like misogyny against women, they clearly haven't read the example of Rahab, who rescued or saved or protected the two spies that went out from the nation of Israel to spy out the land of Jericho. She protected them. Okay, she gave them an opportunity to leave via another window from her premises. The nation of Israel then obviously took over Jericho. And what happened to Rahab? She ended up in the lineage of Jesus. She married a guy and from that relationship, they had the son Boaz. Boaz married Ruth. And if you look at the Jesus's lineage, it comes through Rahab as well. So to suggest that the God of the Bible doesn't bless women and is misogynistic, it's completely contemptible for any human being to say that.
Yeah, no, I'll be discussing that. I'm still busy working on these slides. I finished here. And so, for instance, the Bible does not indicate that women are dumber than men, right? This is just not in the New Testament, right? And notice, it is better than the words of the law shall be burned than that a woman shall be given those words, right? It is better that the words of the law should be burned than that they should be given to a woman. That's in the Talmud, the Jerusalem Talmud. It has been removed from the Babylonian Talmud. Now, I often get criticized by Christians for not lying about the Talmud and not criticizing Jews. For those and also then there were those who criticized me for not criticizing the Catholic Church. I've done so, but I refuse to lie about them. I like to have evidence and say, look, here is what I believe to be a legitimate criticism, not some lie that was made up by the Russians in the 1800s or by the Gnostics in the 200s or by German scholars in the 1800s or whatever the case might be, or even by guys like John MacArthur who, or whatever, by modern, Christians who make up all sorts of amazing lies. Here I want to be very clear about what is a legitimate criticism we can point to with evidence versus just fiction that people make up. So here, this is a very sexist statement, right? But it is removed from the Babylonian Talmud, and there is a change. If you look at the Babylonian Talmud, it has a completely different view of women that elevates them in a very different way. And he says here also, this is in the Talmud, he that talks much with women brings evil upon himself, and he neglects the study of the Torah, and at last will inherit hell, right? Gehenna. However, Jesus speaks very often to women in the New Testament, and his behavior is utterly contrary to this. Despite the fact that feminists and others want to claim, and atheists want to claim that the New Testament is sexist, Jesus completely went against the prevailing attitudes, the negative attitudes against women in the day. You've even got the rabbis taught, this is the governing principle. Any evidence which a woman is not valid to offer testimony, also women are not valid to offer testimony. This is an Islamic view. That's in Josephus. Your thoughts on it, so let you continue.
Well, for starters, the first thing that came to my mind is if people think that about Jesus or the New Testament, then people need to read the account of the Samaritan woman at the well that gave Jesus a glass of water, and look at the way that Jesus spoke to her. Then we have the account of the prostitute that was crying at Jesus' feet, and she wiped off her tears with her hair, and look at what Jesus said to her. Then you have the other woman that took out, was it the nard, and rubbed that perfumed oil in Jesus' hair, and the apostles were making comment to her, and Jesus turned around and says, leave her alone, because what she has done will be told around the world as a remembrance of her. Then when you consider that Mary and Martha were also Jesus's close followers as well, and you find as well, when you read the gospel account from Matthew, Mark, Luke and John, when you look at the women, they seem to get the sense of what was going on with Jesus more than the men. The men were more talking about, like John and James, who was the greatest, or who was going to sit on his left-hand side and who his right-hand side. And Peter was saying, I will never, disown you or reject you. Yeah, so all of those men had to have counsel put on them for their actions and their the comments that they were making. Whereas the women, it was almost like they certainly spiritually got the sense of what Jesus was all about. So, and then you go to Corinthians, and I think it's First Corinthians, where it talks about the sexual relations between a man and a woman, where you don't use the sexual relationship and intimacy as a weapon against each other, give each one to their due. Then you've got the one, I think it's in the book of Peter, where it talks about that if a man doesn't, he should cherish his wife. treat her as the weaker vessel. Not that she's physically weak, but let's be honest. Let's have it right. Men are emotionally made differently to women. If you've got a mother and a father who's got, say, a son, and the son falls over, the father's likely to turn and say, "Oh, get up, it's only a scrap." Whereas the mother's going to run over to the child and brush his knee, kiss him, and it's going to be better, and emotionally reacts differently. So in that context, it says treat the woman as a different as the weaker vessel, because women's emotions are different to men's. But also at the same time, I think it's in the same book where it turns around and says that if a man mistreats his wife, God's not listening to his prayers. That's how serious it is, that God will not listen to the man's prayers if he's mistreating his wife. Then you've got the scripture, I think it's in 1 Timothy chapter 5, where it talks about if a man doesn't look after his own household, because the man is the head of the family, he's worse than the person without faith. So all these things I'm mentioning, I mean, they're great for this example here, but these are the things that sort of made me think, hang on a minute here, this is far superior than what the Quran can offer. Any one of these verses is far superior than all the verses put together in all the ayah together in the Quran with reference on how to treat a woman. I've often gone to Muslims and turned around and said, okay, then let's have a discussion. Then you bring me all the hadith and the ayah in the Quran about how to treat your wife. I'll bring everything that I've got to turn around and say about everything that's in the Bible about how to treat your wife, and let's sit here in front of a group of women and turn and say, well, which one would they rather have as a husband, a Muslim or a Christian? And then then you get the useless arguments that, no, the Quran's never been corrupted. Well, we all know that argument is totally flawed now. But even if it was true that the Quran's never been corrupted, where is the joy? Where is the pride? Where is the boast when one of your ayah in 434, is it 424, it says, if you fear disobedience in your wife, you can beat her. I don't care. Even if it is without changing the Quran, there's no joy in that text being preserved for 1400 years. And there's another one. If you look at a woman, you committed adultery in your heart. That shows you the seriousness of a relationship between a man and a woman. The context of that there is if you're a married person. Absolutely. Whereas in Islam, the Quran says you can have 2 or 3 or 4 wives and unlimited concubines with all that your right hand possesses, treating women as nothing more than chattel.
Right. I just wanted to follow up on a question that was asked, a little bit off topic, but from Dr. Jonathan Gemmell. He asked about Sethian Gnosticism. So Sethian Gnosticism focuses on Seth, the third son of Adam and Eve in the Bible. Although it may be that Seth also happens to be one of the manifestations of Idris, of Thoth, also known as Hermes Trismegistus. So there's some sort of overlap within the Hermetic world. You've got Thoth, also known as Idris in Islam, right? So basically, Sethian Gnosticism Gnosticism as a full system only really developed in the 2nd and 3rd centuries. Before that, there were elements of it based on the Old Testament, but it was not a full, complete system as well developed as the systems that came out of the 3rd and 4th centuries. That said, there were Gnostic texts as late as the very late 1st century or early 2nd century, between, say, 95 and 120. You had the Book of Al-Chasai, right? The Book of Al-Chasai. I have to return to that because I've done this in the past. I will be doing more on this. But so basically, this is the early precursors to full-blown Gnosticism, which eventually took on very Christian attributes. So it's a heresy that takes on Christian attributes, whereas Sethian Gnosticism really takes on very strong Jewish attributes. I wouldn't say it's as well developed as 2nd, 3rd century Gnosticism, but this name, so Thoth, so there's a relationship here as well with Seth and Thoth, Hermes Trismegistus, and Idris. Okay, back to you, Thunderous.
I don't know where we were. Those are the parallels that you learn as you're growing up about what's the influences of Christianity, where you come across these, and then being brought up as a Muslim, how you see Islam in action within the community as to how they treat girls of my age, and then you see it as to like women of your mother's generation, how they are treated. How if you went to a friend's house or a family's house, the women are in one room while the men are in another room. So it's sort of like there's a two-tiered class system. The men would eat first, and then the children would eat with the women second. You know,
How
so
old were you again when you decided to make the conversion?
well, we took the things. I didn't. Well, I convert. It was a natural conclusion. I don't call it conversion. I call it a natural conclusion to
Yeah.
reconcile with God, because that's what Christianity is, isn't it? It's
I'm
your
sure it took years, but
reconciliation.
how old were you when it started to maybe when it finished?
I would say that I had questions when I was at home that if there is a truth, as it were, Islam could not possibly be the truth with what I was reading, how violent it was, how mendacious it is, how hateful it is, how spiteful it is, not just within the text of the Quran, as I managed to get one in English, but also you see the manifestation within the Islamic community. You would hear things, for instance, the Muslim community behind closed doors saying things about, say, Palestine is a good example, or any other sort of like political movement taking place in the world where Islam felt that it was being pressured or persecuted. They would have one language that was inside closed doors, then you'd have another one that was there in the public community. So what we're seeing is pure hypocrisy. So that was also another influence to me, that there's this image of Islam, that the real Islam, which takes place behind closed doors, and then there's the public persona of how people behave in the community for the rest of the world to see, that they're this high, pious, holy, religious people. Well, in reality, you know, here's an example of what I came across with them. Pornography in the 80s was almost like a currency for these people, because with their videotape to tape VHS copying of pornography to each other. And then you get to understand, this is another reason why they have this argument, or they'll bring up this argument that white people are useless people, or they're scum of the earth and such, is because one of the contributors to that is pornography. Because when you're living in, say, Muslim lands and you have access to pornography, what you're predominantly seeing is white women having sex. That's what you're watching. It's predominantly white women. You're not seeing brown-skinned women, black-skinned women, yellow-skinned women. You're predominantly seeing white-skinned women. And that's going to be natural, because the demographic of pornography is from the Western European world. So naturally, you're going to see Western European white women having sex in pornography. But their view is, or it's inculcated in their mind, white women are cheap, white women are gagging for it, white women love sex. So they view coming over to European countries as not just an opportunity for migration to get away from the slums where they're living, or to get away from any Muslim rule and Sharia law, which they particularly hate, but it's also to come over the land where women are just laying in the streets with their legs open, can't wait to be shafted by other men. That's their view. That's one of the contributing factors as to why we have this, if you like, tier system where white women are viewed as whores by predominantly brown people. And pornography is a major contributor to that worldview.
Yeah, but there's also a status thing. I
But
mean,
the irony being is that when they don't marry brown, they marry white, but they never marry black. And this is the irony of it all, because when you're brought up as a Muslim in the Pakistani community, they tell you to hate white, and they try to side with black. So when you look at, say, black lads, if you were, even from my generation, it was kind of like happening. The brown-skinned people or brown-skinned boys will start hanging around black-skinned boys. And what you find is that the brown-skinned boys start talking like the black-skinned boys. They start dressing like the black-skinned boys. They start walking like the black-skinned boys. They start listening to R&B and hip-hop. You very rarely see a brown-skinned lad listening to, say, bands or rock or metal or anything. It tends to be pretty much the hip-hop and the R&B scene. And yet the irony is this, is that when you look at the community, you'll find more brown-skinned men married to white-skinned women than you'll find more brown-skinned men married to black-skinned women. You'll find that there are more brown-skinned women married to white men than there are brown-skinned women married to black men, or if you like, black women married to brown men. But you find the opposite between black and white. But the brown-skinned community, in particular the Muslims, are very good, very crafty at creating a racial divide between white-skinned people, black-skinned people. And yet when you look at it historically, I mean, this is one of the gripes that I have, when you look at music, particularly disco as an example, That was created by black and brown people. No brown skinned people in sight there. When you look at hip hop, black and white people, no brown skinned people. When you look at sport, it's predominantly black and white people. No brown skinned people are involved in any of this. So really, this hatred or this divide or this political paralysis between black and white people, I don't understand why is it then that people can't see that one of the major catalysts of the contributions to the racial tension that we have in this country, or even in Europe, has actually been predicated on the actions of brown-skinned people in all of this, particularly the Muslim community. They're very good at turning around and saying, well, what about, say, the slave trade? This was done by the Christians and white-skinned people, but they're very crafty at not mentioning the 1400 years of slave trade of brown-skinned people that they did with black-skinned people.
Yeah. Yeah, these are very, I mean, obviously a bit of a sensitive topic
But it's a
to
sensitive topic.
raise.
It's a real topic because this is what goes on, and this is what I was brought up with. This is what I saw. I saw it with my own eyes. This kind of this tolerance and intolerance, and this total contradiction of how the community behaves within itself towards other people outside of its own demographic.
Yeah. Just interesting though that homosexuality, while not legal and, forbidden within Islamic society, I mean, Pakistan leads Google searches for gay porn, right? Amongst other things. And all sorts of crazy sexual depravity is very, very popular in Google searches in that part of the world. And there's a history of, few people know it, but homosexuality in Islam, going back to the Turks and the Ottomans in the late 1800s, that became a tradition. It was considered fairly normal. Like when people talk about the Greeks being gay and all of that, most of which is myth, but that was a real thing under the Ottoman Muslims.
Well,
So
the thing
is
is,
that something you
on my
see that's actually happening secretly, say in the UK Pakistani community?
Well, there are always rumors. There are always rumors, but I mean, but my previous, I've had three YouTube. Well, I've got my third. I'm on my third YouTube channel, but my second one actually has several different documentaries about the Bachabazi, or the little boys that were kept for homosexual purposes in Afghanistan.
Yeah.
So to suggest that it doesn't happen, even I'm sure if there are other channels that have probably managed to copy it from me and then put it on their own channel, I've sourced it from, say, Rumble. But the butcher buys is a good example of boys kept for natural for those sexual purposes, very much like what the some of the Christendom did with little boys that were called catamites. So that's just the Muslim version of a catamite. But also with reference to pornography of, say, homosexuality and animals, that's probably because homosexuality between men and animals is predominant there because the women are kept secluded.
Yeah.
Really?
Sorry about that, but
Okay.
I mean,
I'm-
this is actually not that unusual in Islam. So, you got this going on, but there's a lot more to this. Like, for instance, I mean, it's just kind of weird that this culture, and these are paintings preserved in the Turkish museums, like the Topkapi Palace. I mean, like, this is nuts. Male youth penetrating adult male, 19th century Turkey, and this is in color. I mean, this is a very bad photocopy of the thing, but yeah,
Did you
this is
just
Islamic, and they retained this as, I mean, wow.
did you just say nuts? Because that guy looks like he's up to his nuts and guts.
Never mind. Moving on. So hold on. There's more of this stuff that goes around. I mean, there's loads of this stuff. This I've got several of these pictures somewhere, but I'm not gonna hunt for them now. But yeah, they exist. Yeah. These are terrible, terrible reproductions of the paintings. But yeah, just wanted to show people that because these days many Muslims will come on, just as an aside, many Muslims will, like, say on Twitter or whatever social media, they'll be throwing me, oh, and Christianity, you guys all have all the gays. I just post those pictures. I've got a bunch of those pictures, like 4 or 5 that I just post, and I say, hold on, this is the Ottoman Empire, the pride and joy of Islamic sort of um, of Islamic reign a couple of hundred years ago, and this stuff is still preserved as art in Islam. And I just drop those, and it normally shuts them up very effectively.
Right, so there's a question there. Do you still maintain any connections or ties with your Muslim heritage or community? The answer is no, I don't. Very rarely, on occasion, if somebody in the community has passed away and it was somebody that I actually got on with or respected, then I
Hmm.
might go and attend the funeral part of the ceremony. I,
Does your
but
family know that you've left Islam, and how have they dealt
Oh,
with
absolutely, absolutely. I made no secret about it because when it's very much you've got to bear in mind when born in the 60s and growing up in the 70s and the 80s and the 90s, whistleblowers were a very real thing in, say, politics and commerce. So you learn that to stand and be counted for what you believe is something that's to be valued. So I made no secret about me leaving Islam and going along with the biblical narrative. Made no secret of that at all. Now, this is not an idol, but this is not a boast or anything like that, and I don't want it to be perceived as such. But I grew up in the 80s and the 90s. I can handle myself. I've been in prison a couple of times for violence. So I'm not suggesting, I'm not saying that in a very boastful way because it's nothing to boast about. But I think what I'm trying to say is I wasn't some kind of timid little boy that was somehow going to be easily intimidated back into Islam. I could handle myself at the time, and yeah, so that just made it easier for me to stand up against any sort of like a response I was going to get. But also, someone has to make a stand. And the thing is, you see, I don't think I'm some kind of exception. I think really the reality is that there are a lot of people that are brought up in the Sikh, Hindu, and Muslim community that don't actually follow the tenets of their faith systems. Because the one thing I did learn when being grown up as a Muslim is just how many of these people, when they leave their faith systems, actually go over towards communism and atheism.
right?
And
Why do you
the
think they go
communist.
towards atheism and not Christianity? I mean, aren't they being invited to church? Aren't they being evangelized? Why the move to atheism after? I mean, was it just that they've been on such an extreme end that they snap back to the other extreme?
I think that's a very good question. My only answer is to that is that when I came to understand the biblical narrative, the Bible is very clear and candid that Satan runs the planet. Of that, there's no doubt. 1 John 5:19, Revelation 12:7-9, Jesus' baptism when Satan says, "I'll give you all these kingdoms if you do an act of worship." The first chapter of the book of Job, if in so the scriptures are quite clear. So it's then when you look back on, say, world history, particularly with Islam, Hinduism, Sikhism, as those were the religions I grew up with, you can see why they turned to atheism is because of how absurd their faith systems are. Their faith systems so absurd. But then one of the arguments that many people have as to why they become atheists is because they can't reconcile the evil they see in the world, the injustice, because if there is a God, then surely God will do something about it. Now, the biblical narrative gives the perfect answer for that, but their
Mm.
faith systems don't. So what it does is, as they're growing up in their faith systems, they see the stupidity or the barbarity of their own faith systems, but they're very emotionally connected to the injustice in the world. And what they don't recognize is that they're made in God's image. No wonder that the injustice, resonates with them because they're reflecting God's qualities, but they don't see it. So the easy answer in all of this is that there is no God, or if there is a God, they become agnostic, and atheism is sort of like a central idea to them that they can draw some kind of, if you like, solidarity with. Well, one of the things I love, for instance, when I go to, say, a Muslim funeral, or the last two that I've been to, it occurs to me that these people aren't really Muslim. They're just a brown skin gang. Islam is just the name of a gang. It's a bit like the Bloods or the Crips. It's just what you're born into. They don't hold any of the tenets seriously themselves. But as far as Islam as an ideology is concerned on the world scene, the world missed a trick when Salman Rushdie wrote the Satanic Verses, in as much that when he wrote the Satanic Verses, what people didn't realize was that Islam is very fragmented. And the illustration I would use is very much like, I don't know if you had it in Poland or if it happened, I know it happened in Italy a lot, as well as, say, places in like the Netherlands, but football violence of the 80s and the 90s.
Poland
So in England,
was probably number one in that back in the day.
really? Okay, well, I dare say. So, though I never heard much about it, probably because the news system that we have in the UK at the time was very much TV news, and you didn't hear much of what was going on abroad, only in your home country. Okay, so what would happen is you've got one football gang fighting another football gang when they played matches. So Chelsea would fight Millwall, Millwall would fight Leeds, Manchester United would fight Tottenham, so on and so forth. However, that's very much like the political infighting between Muslim communities or Muslim sort of like sects. However, come an England game, they all unite and they'll fight for one cause. And that's the same thing when Salman Rushdie wrote this Satanic Verses. That was the first time on the world scene people should have seen for themselves. They missed the trick that the Muslim world united in their hatred for the criticism that they perceived in the Satanic Verses.
To say that again, that this was actually it caused them to unite.
Well, yeah, because you find it's the Ayatollah Khomeini put out, was it a $1 million fatwa on Salman Rushdie's head? I don't think the fatwa was the motive. I think the notoriety united the Muslim world, and you see that now. Ever since, say, the Satanic Verses, anytime Muhammad is offended, you don't just find criticism in that country for what has been said. You find criticism throughout. Say, for instance, let's say, for instance, the Charlie Hebdo. As an example, it took place in France, but there were protests in other countries over what took about there. That shows you a united front against what took place in France about the criticisms that Charlie Hebdo or the cartoon comics that Charlie Hebdo were releasing about Muhammad. The same thing when there was a Miss World that was held in Nigeria, and one of the judges said that if Muhammad was alive, he'd have one of these women as a wife. Protests broke out in a couple of countries and 18 people died. You see a systematic pattern, and all of this has been a byproduct, or more noticeably, ever since the Satanic Verses was released. Okay. So people have really missed a trick there, that they are not as isolated or as individual as what people think them to be. There is an underground structure in the Islamic world that unites them all and is triggered whenever an event deserves it to be. And what greater event than you've got now than the protests that are taking place with reference to what's happening in the Gaza Strip?
Yeah, I just want to say thank you, Lil, for the purchase, and Mr. Rock for the donation. Thank you very much. Yeah, I had someone write to me a couple of days ago from Texas, and they've previously published a book, and they said that they watched my series on Palestine and the Soviet connections, and also my series on atheism, and they are an atheist, and they said that they haven't found any evidence in their mind for God, and therefore they're an atheist, but he was shocked when watching my atheism series on how depraved atheism has been in the last 250 years, and how these atheists, from their own words, believe in God and defy God, and they're not really what you'd call atheists. They are anti-biblical, anti-God, anti-Jesus, anti-Christian. And I mean that they've committed the worst atrocities known to man, right, in recent history. And then he then also said that he was shocked that people aren't familiar with the truth of the history of Palestine and their Soviet connections, their Nazi connections, and also how stupid it is of leaders to want to create a two-state solution when the whole raison d'etre, the aim of the Palestinian side, is to murder all the Jews, preferably every single Jew on the planet, because that will bring Muhammad back. And then Jesus will fight at the right hand of Muhammad as Muhammad's companion, and he will pray behind Muhammad, and he will follow Muhammad, and he will murder all the Christians and break the cross and kill the pigs because, blah, 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 because there'll be no more Christians and people to eat pigs anymore. And how can you live in peace with the people that literally want to genocide you? And yeah, so yeah, I mean, just the weakness of people, but also when you look at Al-Qaeda, when you look at some of their work, some of their writing, they had the thing called the now the name suddenly escapes me. Let me see if I can find it. No, I don't. So I don't have it. But Al-Qaeda wrote a book about atrocity. For some reason, the name just escaped my mind as I was about to say it. But they wrote a book on atrocity, and they mentioned that you have to commit atrocity, which will shock and paralyze people and allow you to take advantage, and you'll shock them into compliance and shock them into doing nothing. And part of what they're doing is following this strategy, so that you are so shocked that you are just stunned. You don't know what to do because they're breaking all the rules, and this leads to paralysis, and you have no Nothing in your methods, in your systems, in your laws allow you to deal with this kind of thing. It's so severe that you're just lost for a response.
I just want to respond to a question that's in the chat by the horse. It says, "I'm surprised Gert Wilders has kept his head since the Charlie Hebdo days. I'm happy he has, but he
Here it
has
is.
a large tag on him." I think that Gert Wilders has probably got a good set of bodyguards and probably rehearses his movements in a very deliberate manner so as to avoid any personal conflict, but he's got away with it so far, but some in this country haven't done. There was one guy that got stabbed for was it the guy that did fitna, Theo something or other, Theo Von something. He got stabbed and murdered. There was somebody that printed a book or a set of books or something. They got murdered as well. So much has happened since the Satanic Verse as well, and all it has done is embolden Muslims to carry out hits on critics of Islam, but then that should come as nothing new, really, because Muhammad killed his critics as well.
Yeah.
So all the Satanic Verses did was create a starting point, if like, or a catalyst for these things to take place.
Few people realize that I just found the book here, The Management of Savagery, the most critical stage to which the Ummah will pass. This is also similar to the Maoist doctrine. Mao had a doctrine as well, which he called the People's War. And this was applied very successfully in South Africa. This was a doctrine of propaganda, which was, so you'd have a massively disturbing, violent event. You'd blow up children in a playground. You'd kill 10 babies or something, and then you would have a propaganda campaign, and saying that you did this because you were the victim, and this is just your cry for help. And then you'd do something incredibly violent, and then the next thing you would do, you would then use this as a propaganda event. And so this is Maoist doctrine as well. So this is communist doctrine, socialist doctrine. So this is the People's War. Worked very well in South Africa. They managed to stage a coup and take over the country, the communists. But also, this is a Muslim thing. And of course, Al-Qaeda taught that 9/11 would wake up the Muslim world. It would rally them because they respect strength. They respect violence. And this was the event that created. And just like the whole Gaza thing, this is creating a unity. Few people realize they rally around violence. They rally around force. And there's no reasoning with people who have not been reasoned into their position, but have been indoctrinated or emotionally manipulated into those positions. And at some point, unless you take very hard stances, you're going to have to use violence or force to de-escalate this situation. It's very hard to find a way to deal with people who want to use savagery, not just, savagery. So this is
that should come as no surprise, though, Lloyd, because when you think about it, savagery is part of the human nature that we have to fight against. So you've got an ideology that caters for the flesh, the fallen flesh, and Islam is perfect for that. It caters for the fallen flesh in the sense of its sexual depravity, its attitude towards women, and its love of violence and the spilling of blood. The religion of Islam caters for the fallen flesh. That's what I mean by is if you prefer violence, if you're an angry person and such, Islam is the religion for you because it gives you a religious foundation for all those fleshly tendencies that are manifest within you. But you just said a moment ago that it's a struggle to fight against this. Well, that's what Christianity is. The Bible teaches you to fight against the inclination of the flesh, to fight against the inclination of where. That's what Paul had the problem with. So
yeah, I mean, look in Islam, for instance, you look at the Sirah, right? You've got in Muhammad's Islamic biography, in Sirat Rasulullah, right? If everyone can find that, you can look for Sirat Rasulullah, but it's in my archive. You can find this. But Allah tells Muhammad, a prophet must slaughter before collecting captives. A slaughtered enemy is driven from the land. Muhammad, you craved the desires of this world, its goods, and the ransom captives would bring. So Muhammad is quite clearly worldly, clearly looking after the things of the flesh. But Allah desires killing them to manifest the religion. Islam must be manifested by death. I mean, this is very bluntly stated here.
And this is what you see when you've got 1400 years of this ideology. But you're seeing the manifestation of it now more so than ever, because it's got nowhere to hide, because the advent of the internet. This is the other thing as well. When I was growing up, I had to go to the library to get the books to read what was contained within the religious text. So my polemics, if you like, started probably from about 1988. And I'm not going to suggest that I was going door to door spreading, this is why Islam was bad. My arguments were very much as and when the arguments ever came place with the people I ever encountered. But then in the late 90s, the internet came out, and then YouTube came thereafter. And I never thought for a moment that polemics against Islam would become as big as they have and as popular as they've been. But I'm not tech savvy either. So the question could be, so why didn't I get involved in the very sort of like late 90s, the early 90s, involved in any of this on the internet? And in a nutshell, I suppose I was quite naive as to how to use social media systems, but also I was kind of naive as to how big or popular or important that they would become, or underestimated the interest that people would have in this kind of discussion. I've contributed to a few things, as you know. We've done a few things together in the past, but it's people like yourself now that are at the forefront of all of this. And my knowledge now has actually, I don't know if it's true with any other people, or maybe Akra could confirm this in the comments, that you learn more about Islam when you become an ex-Muslim. And I think that the same thing is said of many people when they leave the faith systems that they were in, that they were brought up in. They learn more from it when they've left it than what they did in the entirety when they were within it, when they were inside it.
Yeah. Now, Akra, thanks for your contribution. Just briefly, someone asked, did Al-Qaeda choose September the 11th because on September 12th, the Holy Roman League, the Holy Roman Army, shattered the Turks in Vienna? And yes, that is true, because Al-Qaeda, according to bin Laden, he wanted to roll back the clock to before the time that the Ottomans were defeated in Europe, before the Muslims were routed in Europe and then kicked out a few years later by King Jan Sobieski of Poland. Perhaps we can slowly wind down on this one. How did you change as a person? How did you change as a person after you left Islam? How do you feel that your perspective widened? How do you feel that your ability to express yourself opened? And are you disappointed with the secularization of Britain? And do you see any signs of hope? I know that's three questions.
As very much as far as hope is concerned, my hope is in Matthew 6:33 and Daniel 2:44. These to me is very real. The kingdom of God, or God's government, is very real to me. It's not some kind of abstract concept or a condition within the heart. It's a real government that's going to manifest itself on earth in a very real way. Jesus told us to pray about it. Daniel 2:44 tells us how it's going to be accomplished. And it's not ambiguous as well in its writings as to how Daniel describes the implementation of government. That for me is real. The next thing that you asked was about my worldview and how did it change me as a person. I would say that there's a line in the movie Trainspotting where the character turns around and says, "Here I am surrounded by my family and friends, but I've never been so alone in all my life." I would say that within a lot of human beings, there's the person that they are inside their heart, and then there's the outside projection that people see, their community sees, their work colleagues sees, and their friends see. Because there's a fear of revealing who you really are, because the world basically teaches you to be tough, and you have to have a strong personality, so on, be strong, forceful, so on and so forth. But when you read the Bible, the way that it's written, the way that God is talking to you as a person, it really touches that person inside you. I think there's a scripture in the book of Samuel, 1 Samuel chapter 16, I think it is verse 9, where it says, men see with the heart, whereas God sees, the men see with the eyes, but God sees what the heart is. I think it's 16 verse 9. I could be wrong on that. So what I'm saying is that it's very easy to become that person when you find that the God of the Bible is telling you that's the person I want you to become. Of course, we've all got sort of like traits that are I still have fleshly sort of like inclinations. If I'm annoyed, I can sort of clench my fist, and sometimes I can find myself in a situation where I think violence is the only way out of this, but I choose not to. But it's very hard for me to choose that course.
It's just good luck for a lot of people. I don't have access to high explosives.
Yeah, it is. So there's, and also, and this is going to sound. I don't want this to sound inappropriate as well, but during the 80s and the 90s, I was, I went nightclubbing. The nightclubbing scene was my thing. So, growing up in the 70s in this country, we only had three channels: BBC One, BBC Two, and ITV. So the radio was on quite a lot, and if the radio's on a lot, you're being exposed to a lot of music. Hence, music is the thing that I love about life. So when I got to the point where I left home and I started nightclubbing, I found the thing that I really enjoyed in life, which was nightclubbing and the music and the dance scene. And I lived during probably the greatest period in music's history. So I was exposed to a lot of music, a lot of nightclubs, and a lot of genres. But womanizing was one of those things that I was exposed to as well. But I knew it was wrong. So I think what I'm trying to say is that there are many things that you do in life. You do them, but you know they're wrong, but you don't know why they're wrong. It's only when you come to understand what the Bible teaches that it kind of like, it confirms I wasn't wrong after all to think that those things were wrong. It is wrong to womanize. It is wrong to have sex outside of marriage. It is wrong to lie. It is wrong to steal. It is wrong to use violence as a means to resolve a situation. And you only get that when you actually look at what the scriptures teach. And
On that point, I just want to mention something. Sorry to interrupt you again, but this is the history of At-Tabri. Was he the cousin of Muhammad or something? History of At-Tabri, and it says here, just get that right. History of Tabri, volume 9, page 139. Layla bint al-Khatam ibn Adi ibn Amr ibn Sawad, blah, 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 yet, good grief, what a long name. She approached the Prophet while his back was to the sun and clapped him on his shoulder. He asked who it was, and she replied, I am the daughter of one who competes with the wind. I am Layla bint al-Khatam. I have come to offer myself, so marry me. He replied, I accept. She went back to her people and said that the messenger of Allah had married her. They said, what a bad thing you have done. You are a self-respecting woman, but the Prophet is a womanizer. What a bad thing you have done. You are a self-respecting woman, but the Prophet is a womanizer. Seek an annulment from him. She went back to the Prophet and asked him to revoke the marriage, and he complied. Just thought I would share that.
Well, he's not doing anything that any other man didn't do at the time, eh?
I thought he's supposed to be the greatest of men, the best. How many women did Jesus sleep with? According to Martin Luther, 3. So Muhammad slept with at least 22, I think, that we can count in the record over the years. And Jesus, 0, as far as we know, although people do try to claim that he did.
Jesus slept with 0. There's no doubt about it. Jesus didn't have any intercourse or interaction in an intimate way with any woman. That much is certain.
Yeah, I just have a couple of questions. Why do you think that the church has let ex-Muslims down so that they switch to atheism instead of? I mean, they haven't presented a proper alternative, and therefore they leave and go become atheists. And do you see any hope?
The churches have let people down. Well, you don't have to ask that question. I think the church's example has spoken for itself, where it allows gay marriages. Some churches teach Darwinian evolution. Some are tolerant of the LGBTQI drag map. Some of them are heavily embroiled in business ventures or capitalism, with using the donations as investments, like the Church of England have done. So the church has done themselves no favors in any of this, because they've already come out from an ideology full of hypocrisy, and brutality. They may as well stay where they are if they're seeing that the alternative is just as bad as the one that they're in.
Right. Do you have a message of hope for them? Do you have a message for ex-Muslims, what to do, where to go, how to view things? Something that would give them an alternative, the one that they're looking for, and find the peace that you found.
Well, you mentioned something a moment ago about atheism, where the guy turned around and says, "I did not know what this was. That this was atheism." In effect, he just opted for atheism without doing any of the apprenticeship of understanding what atheism really is. It's just like, I don't believe in God anymore. I'm just going to become an atheist. It's become like a word, a phrase. It's just something that you do with no understanding. And it's the same thing with Islam. People don't read the sources to understand what they're getting involved in or what they are involved in. For Muslims, I would say this. Right, Muhammad at the age of 52 married a 6-year-old girl, and he has sexual intimacy when she was 9 and he was 54. Now, there's a principle brought out in the book of Revelation, chapter 18, verse 4. We don't need to understand what Babylon is. Everybody has their own opinion as to what Babylon is. However, there is a principle where it turns around and says, get out from Babylon if you don't want to share in her sins. Now, what does that teach us? It teaches us one thing that many people don't seem to understand. It's what's known as communal or community responsibility. What that means is that from God's point of view, if there's an ideology that he abhors or that he hates, and he's going to bring judgment on that ideology, you go down with it because you've identified yourself as a part of it. So my advice is it comes incumbent on all people to do exactly what the scriptures say. Proverbs chapter 2 verses 1-5 talks about digging as for hidden treasure the knowledge of God. Jesus turns around and says, I think it's in Matthew 10, where it says, keep on knocking, keep on seeking, keep on asking. It's incumbent on people. And I think the Apostle Paul turns around and says, keep making sure that you're in the truth, or be ready to make a defense for the hope that's within you. You can only make a defense of your faith if you've taken knowledge as to what your faith is predicated on. Okay, so my advice to anybody is to get educated in the system that you believe in and ask yourself the question, do you want to stand with this ideology or not? You need to make sure it's true. For others, I've often said you need to work out whether there is a God first or not. There are certain truths that are subjective. Is the BMW E36 M3 convertible the most beautiful car in the world? I would say it is, but that's a subjective. However, there are some truths that are absolute. One example is there a God? That's an absolute truth, if there is or isn't. And it's an absolute truth that there is a God. Is it an absolute truth that God made mankind and the earth and such things? That's an absolute truth that he did. They didn't happen by accident. So then you wheedle it down to, well, if there is a God and he made all things, well, which one of these books is telling the truth? Well, in my opinion, from my own research, it's the Bible. That's an absolute truth to me, that the Bible is telling the truth about God. So there is a process that a person can go through if they're not sure where to start. I would say start whether you need to work out if there is a God or not. Because if you're just going to go to the Bible and have an understanding of what the Bible teaches, then at what point is that not just an academic study? Your faith needs to be based on something. You need to be convinced there is a God first before you can make a defense for it.
Right. Yeah, I just want to, India, there was something you said that made me think of something. But guys, I have this on my community page, what you're seeing here. Luther's Works, volume 28. It's his commentary on 1 Timothy. And it's actually page 246. It's not page 24, although I do say this in the text. It's on page 24. And someone wrote to me and said I couldn't find it, but they weren't looking at the commentary on 1 Timothy anyway. So, yeah, it's page 246, my error, but I do say so in the text, so they obviously never read the text. Martin Luther says, if I look at my sins, they are nothing when compared with those of Paul. According to the Spirit, however, Paul is nothing when compared with me. So this guy was very special. And there was something he said that triggered this in me, and I'm not sure why. But Martin Luther was very, very special. Yeah, I mean, so look, there are bad examples of Christianity, but this doesn't mean that there isn't good Christianity. These violations of Christianity are not examples of Christianity, whereas what we would consider good Muslims are Muslims being bad, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah, so we should maybe just wind down here, end up here. So atheists, maybe then, according to what I heard you say at the end, should study atheism and actually see what not what the highfalutin theories of atheism are, how amazingly mathematically precise it is, but look at the history, right? Like on my channel, and you can see atheism has been vicious. I mean, it has been genocidal, like nothing else in the last 250 years. And they'd see, and then also stop learning Christianity from people who don't have a clue, you know. So yeah, they are these are vastly different religions. These are vastly different ideas, and yeah, there's Christianity built the Western world, and we are ruining it by not sticking to those principles and the law that it brought.
And the thing is this with Islamic prejudice as well that you get from a very early age. You're already brainwashed into the mindset that the Bible's being corrupted anyway. So we all know that the Bible's not being corrupted, but in the eyes of the Muslim growing up, it can appear that the Bible has been corrupted because
But
you
they
see
taught, I
so
mean, the
many
well is poisoned for them from an early age, from 4 or 5 years old. They taught
exactly
that.
that. Yeah, so when they're looking in the media and they're seeing certain Christian denominations behaving in a manner that contradicts what the Bible teaches, from their point of view, we can see the contradiction in their behavior, but from their point of view, they see that as a corruption of the Bible. That's the problem, you see. So
Yeah.
what we see as a contradiction in what the teachings are, they see as a corruption. So from their point
Right.
of view, it reinforces their worldview that the Bible has been corrupted because look at how these Christian denominations behave in a certain manner.
Yeah.
And just going
Yeah.
back to the Muhammad marrying a 6-year-old girl and having sex with her when she was 19, going back to the principle of communal responsibility. In effect, what you are saying, if you identify yourself as a Muslim, is you're basically saying that there is nothing wrong with a 54-year-old man having sex with a 9-year-old girl. If you turn around and say that you're a Muslim, so there are 1.9 billion human beings on the planet, or 1.7, wherever the number is, it keeps changing from week to week, who are basically saying just by identifying themselves as a Muslim, whether they realize it or not, whether they understand it or
They endorse
not,
it by their actions.
they endorse it by their actions,
Yeah.
by their statements. They endorse it.
Yeah. Actions
That's
speak
what
louder
they're
than
saying.
words, and they tell fewer lies.
When Jesus was held up by Pontius Pilate to the crowds, and the crowds turned around and said, "We have no king but Caesar." All right. In effect, what they were saying, I think, forget what the Caesar's name was. Was it Tiberius, the Caesar at the time? I forget. My history is really poor tonight.
Yeah, don't worry about it.
He was a homosexual pederast that lived on the island of Capri with a 20,000 Praetorian guard. They were basically saying that pederast is our king, not Jesus. That was the implication of what they were saying. Whether they knew he was a pederast or not is an irrelevance, but that's what the implication of what their statement was. And it's the same thing today with Muslims. When they say that our prophet is Muhammad, they're basically saying this child rapist is our prophet.
Yeah, no. And they're not going to get away with that because we've now
No.
learned all about Islam. The internet has opened this door. We often know Islam better than Muslims do. But we need to take a serious stand because these guys are committed, and I'm not sure how committed we are to ending this. But yeah, I'd like to wind down here, Thunderous, and maybe we can pick this up again next Sunday. We get to continue the conversation then.
Yeah. Well, let's continue. Can I just ask people in the chat? Can you formulate some sentences? I was trying to do this very ad hoc tonight, and I thought I'll. When I went on Thaddeus's show and on Nuria's show, both of them had a list of questions, and tonight's show I thought I'll do very ad hoc, and I don't think I probably covered any of the points that I wanted to, or many of the points that I wanted to cover. So next week I'd like to discuss, if there's any further questions about Islam, please ask them. But I really want to touch on why I didn't accept atheism and Darwinian evolution next time.
Okay.
So if you've got any questions, put them in the chat.
Okay, that'll be great. Yeah, so drop those, and we'll cover those next week. So we hope to have at least 3 of these conversations on this topic on Thunderous's journey out of Islam towards Christianity and why he detests atheism. So yeah, so guys, thank you very much for your time. Over 100 of you, that's fantastic. Hello, Dr. Obvious. Hello, Tom, Andrew Martin, good to see you. Catherine M, Don Scotus, and so many more. Good to have you all, Buddy Boy and others. So thanks very much for the contribution, for the questions, and to you, Thunderous. Always good to have you on the channel. You know, adding your presence, and of course, yeah, and yeah, it was really good meeting you in the UK recently. So guys, I was in the UK. I had to go on business, and yeah, so I was incredibly busy. It was an insane time. So, but I'm back. Although I will be traveling in a while to Barcelona, so I'll reach out to some of you. and hopefully make a plan to meet up. So, guys, thank you very much. Thank you, Horse. Very kind. Dr. Obvious, you're late. That's okay, but we can always rewatch. So, guys, thanks. We'll see you all tomorrow night. I'll be doing, hopefully finishing the final episode on nominalism. And Tony, thank you all for your contribution too. So we'll see you guys soon. Okay, we'll see you with Thunderous in 1 week. Thanks all. Take care and good night. God bless.
Bye-bye, everyone.